Hello, everyone. You're listening to Analytics Insight. I am Priya Dialani, Senior Editor at Analytics Insight, and your host. We are back soon with one more insightful podcast, as we're always eager to share something valuable and influential with our users. Nonetheless, we aim to spread knowledge and awareness of the ever evolving technology space to our listeners. Well, a lot of things are currently happening in the USA as the new Biden administration takes the office. So, something really important the administration is trying to focus on is the vaccine rollout. Vaccines are the ultimate solution for the COVID 19 crisis. If enough people are vaccinated and the virus remains sufficiently stable, the country can hope to achieve control over the virus and people can hope to get back to something like normal life. However, what role technology will play to speed up the process of vaccine rollout? To get more insights into this, today with us we have Mr. Arijit Sengupta, founder and CEO of Aible, an AI industry leader as well as Harvard Business School fellow. Moreover, he's also the author of the book AI is a Waste of Money. Hi Arijit, how are you doing?
Hi, Priya. Thanks for having me on your show.
Great. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. And I'm sure it's going to be a really interesting one because we're going to talk something about the current situations that are happening around.
Please.
Great. So, can you tell us about our listeners about what is your company about? What is Able, and what are the specialization and services it offers?
Yeah, Able is focused on AI that delivers impact. See, the first generation of AI was obsessively focused on academic things like how accurate is the model, how quickly does it run, and things of that nature. And there was some great research out of MIT and Bain that showed that less than 10% of people were actually getting economic value out of AI. In fact, that's part of the reason my book was called AI is a Waste of Money, because I found in the vast majority of cases, people were actually not getting economic value. And value might be lives saved as well as money saved, but we have to start from this definition of what is impact for the organization and understand the business context and the business constraints so that you're actually delivering business impact. And for too long, AI had been divorced from that, and the whole focus of Able was impact, not accuracy, and that's what we have been delivering to.
Thank you so much, Arijit, for letting our listeners know about what the company is into, and it's quite interesting to know about it. Having said that, when we're talking about you being the founder and the CEO of the company, can you tell us and give a brief overview of your background and what has been your role in the company till date?
So I'm a bit of a recovering nerd. I originally came to the US long time back when to study artificial intelligence at Stanford, and that was because in those days in India you couldn't study artificial intelligence at the bachelor's level very easily. Ended up studying computer science, economics, and dance of all things, as you can imagine. Went off to work at Microsoft, Oracle, the usual suspects. Ended up at the Harvard Business School to get my MBA, and ended up starting a company called Beyond Core out of the Harvard Business School Business Plan contest. And that was one of the first leaders of using AI in doing analytics automatically. Eventually got acquired by Salesforce to become Salesforce Einstein Discovery. Now it's been rolled into the Tableau capabilities at Salesforce. But fundamentally, been doing this for a while, have a couple of dozen patents in the space. But my focus has always been rather than just focusing on the technology, coming at it from the perspective of the business user. What are they trying to achieve? How can we make it practical? How can we actually deliver results? And in the company, and as a CEO, you have to do everything. But my favorite role to play is that of inventor. But you play every role.
Great, and I think I very much like the point of how you're uh, 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 trying to ponder upon the question that how can we make it more practical, how can we make it more valuable. I think that's a very important aspect that you're focusing, and that's quite great also. Um, Having said that, we have talking about your overview and your background, but there are already a lot of companies and who are leveraging technology, particularly artificial intelligence. So why did you start the company? And also I really wanted to know more about the book as well. So can you tell us more about the book? Why did you write a book? And that to something like the topic, the name seems quite interesting. AI is a waste of money. So can you tell us more about the book as well?
Yeah, so essentially, the reason I wrote the book is the same as the reason I started the company. I wrote the book first. Basically, after having built an AI company and done about 1,000 AI projects at that point, I had a kind of the sinking feeling that was I really creating value with AI? And one of the things that sticks out is a customer who told me, "Your AI is never wrong, but it's completely useless." And I was like, what the heck does this person mean? My AI is never wrong, but it's completely useless. And what I realized, and this was in a sales context where you're telling a customer which sales prospects they should focus on. What they were really saying was the AI was fantastic. If it told them that a customer would buy, that customer was very likely to buy. But the AI was being very conservative. Imagine this: if a customer sells about 10% of the people they pursue, but that's a good business. You after pursuing 10 people, you sell one of them. You can be very profitable doing that. But the AI doesn't know what's the cost benefit trade off of pursuing a customer and selling a deal versus the cost of pursuing a customer and not being able to sell something. So the AI is just trying to be accurate. So it'll get really, really conservative because if it tells you somebody will buy, there are 9 ways to get it wrong. If it tells you somebody won't buy, there's only one way to get it wrong, right? So the AI gets very conservative. The things, when it tells you that somebody will buy, it is very, very correct. But a salesperson, and by the way, during demos, this works beautifully. Everyone's demo looks fantastic because, hey, everything you said about the customer who will buy looks really good. But when you deploy it, when salespeople actually start using it, suddenly they realize, hey, I used to have, let's say, 50 people I used to pursue in a quarter. Now the AI is telling me to only pursue 5 people. And it's absolutely right about those 5 people, but I can't keep my business running by pursuing just 5 people, right? What got lost there is the business context. What got lost there is the fact that the human knows that, I might make $1,000 when I sell a customer and it costs me $5 to pursue them. So I'd be willing to take 100 bad attempt at selling to get one deal. That human trade-off is not part of the way we think about AI today. And that's just one example of many of the practical realities that are not considered in AI creation. In fact, one of the most dangerous things, as people will say sometimes, is give me the data and get out of my way. That is incredibly wrong, because if you don't understand what is the customer's definition of success, how do they define business impact? Is it simplistically, is it revenue? Is it profit? Is it cost reduction? Unless you think through these things, how many salespeople do they have? Unless these are part of your consideration, your AI is just a lab experiment. It's a research paper. It actually can't create value. And I fundamentally believe that's why the vast majority of companies were not succeeding with AI. So I wrote the book first. With thankfully, Salesforce had a fantastic sabbatical policy. So with permission from Salesforce, I went and took a sabbatical and wrote the book. And at the end of it, I just had to go solve it because I felt like I'd spent more than a decade contributing to the problem. So I might as well go try solving the problem, and started Able right after I wrote the book.
That was interesting, and thank you for telling me and our listeners that what was the story behind the book and how you kickstarted with Able as well. And it was quite interesting, to be honest, and I'm sure our users are going to love it too. Now, a lot of like I in the introduction when I said a lot of things are happening around, and we already know the year of 2020 was quite unprecedented with the outbreak of COVID-19. However, the new administration that is set to rule the USA has promised to turn the COVID-19 pandemic around and drastically speed up the pace of vaccinating Americans against the virus. Um, So, while one of the biggest shocks that the new team had to digest was the transition period, where they saw complete lack of vaccine distribution strategy under the former President Donald Trump. So, even weeks after multiple vaccines were approved for the use in the United States. Having said that, what are your views on the COVID-19 outbreak? And when you're talking about technology, do you think AI particularly has been a catalyst to it?
So AI has been used. Actually, I think there are two parts to your question: one around vaccines and one around COVID in general. Let's talk about COVID in general first, and I'll come back to your vaccine question, vaccine distribution question. Um, in COVID, people have used AI quite a bit to try to figure out the underlying patterns in the early days. There was a lot of good work on applying AI to health outcomes. But I think one thing that people forgotten was how AI could be used in saving livelihoods in that situation, not just lives, but livelihoods. What do I mean by that? When COVID crisis hit, a lot of people, a lot of business managers, very rationally decided to cut costs. They decided to cut salespeople. They decided to cut marketing budgets because the first thing you do is you say, oh my God, I have a lot of uncertainty. If I let go of some people, if I save up some money, maybe I will get the flexibility to do some other things. But human beings invariably cut too much because we don't know what is the right level to cut. So we'll go by our gut. But AI can actually be very good in trying out many scenarios. A human being is not very good at thinking through all the possible scenarios and coming up and saying, well, under these circumstances, I should cut my sales team by 5%. Under these circumstances, I should cut it by 10%. And what is the real implication of the cost cutting we were doing? So around that time when COVID hit, we actually did a whole campaign where we made our technology available for free to any company that was going to use our technology to save lives and livelihoods. So we literally did projects with customers where we would go and help them figure out that they were thinking of cutting their sales team by a certain amount, but that was the suboptimal decision. They were going to lose a lot of money by doing that. And helping them figure out what is the optimal level of cutting costs as opposed to just cutting costs based on gut feel. These are the less exciting things. It's always more fun to talk about, hey, we used AI to find a healthcare pattern that helped with vaccine outbreak, vaccine creation. But the realistic thing is these kind of bread and butter stuff, thinking about how does AI help impact our lives in the broadest sense is going to be very important. And I was very proud of the work. And the team also provided their consulting for free. So it was like these customers who did those projects, they didn't pay for software or services, but we saw that as an important thing for us to do to help. And then the second question you asked was around vaccine distribution. See, one of the fundamental issues right now is that the country is really divided, and a vaccine is a scarce resource, and when you do distribution of vaccine, it's just going to always be a question of, hey, if it's a zero sum game, right? If you got the vaccine, I didn't get the vaccine. So how you define who gets the vaccine becomes a politically fraught issue. And there were some interesting debates even in New York Times where people were getting upset over how the vaccine distribution decisions were taken. Should healthcare workers have been prioritized first? Should older people have been prioritized first? Should racial considerations be considered? Things like that. And the reason we get into these debates is human beings are not very good at looking at complex set of factors. We are very good at coming up with simple rules like, hey, let's give it to frontline workers, let's give it to 65-year-olds and up. These are simple rules. But a slightly more complex set of rules would have been, what do we as a society care about? We might care about health outcomes. How likely are you to have a really bad outcome if you get COVID? Well, if we focus on that, then clearly older populations or populations with diabetes, etc., should get the vaccine sooner. Second question might be, how likely are you to transmit that a disease if you get it? So people working in a grocery store or somebody who is lives with 12 other people in the same house, they would get priority. If you consider what is the impact on the economy, what is the impact on jobs, what is the impact on livelihoods, then you would want to give vaccines to people who work in factories where they can't really come in over a video conference, right? And like the person who should get the vaccine the last is somebody like me who can effectively do my job very easily over the internet, right? And when you get to these first principles, you will find that racial equity actually becomes part of the discussion because a Latino worker in the food distribution industry, working in a retail store who lives with 12 people, would get prioritized for that vaccine. Not because they are Latino, but because they are correlated with certain jobs, with certain family sizes. So it's not a question of ethnicity, it's a question of we as a society agreeing on some fundamental principles and then letting AI figure out who should get it based on those fundamental principles. And if we do it the right way, the most disadvantaged among us will end up getting ranked higher, not because of characteristics, but because of the first principles. People are bad at doing this. AI is very good at doing this because the good thing about AI is it'll follow your instructions, it'll follow your prioritization, right? And it can come in and explain to ad infinitum basis why it made a recommendation. If it gave you a vaccine and not me, it can literally come back and tell me exactly why it assigned the vaccine to you and not me. So I think we are being a bit too simplistic in our discussions about how vaccines should be allocated, and that is being driven by thinking about simple ways to communicate as opposed to how can we use all the technology at our disposal, and maybe step back and say what are our first principles, and we might end up at the same goal, same results, without having a group of people feel that they are being discriminated against, or people feeling that certain groups are being discriminated towards. It's AI can be a good way to do this right, and I don't see any effort to do that.
Thank you so much, Arijit. I think that was quite insightful. And yes, certain points that I would like to mention again. That yes, AI follows instructions, whereas we humans are pretty bad at it still till date. And yes, we are being simplistic when you're talking about the vaccine rollouts, and probably we are going to face difficulties when you're going to roll out, and of course for the issues that you have mentioned. Um, so, there are a lot of studies and estimates, and scientists believe that we'll need to vaccinate around 240 million people, which represents about 70% of the US population, to achieve that kind of control. So, there are unforced errors evident in the initial vaccine rollout. So, they might include the refusal to use the full might of the federal government and the failure to learn from past pandemic planning. By ignoring the need for state funding, preparation, and guidance in the fall, the previous administration set us up to suffer a more confused and protracted rollout this winter. So, what, according to you, is the wrong and right with the vaccine rollout till date? And how do you think technology can be integrated into the rollout strategy to get the US back on track to meet its goals?
So, firstly, they have been at the job for a week, right? So it's a bad moment in time to tell people what they should be doing better. But clearly, and again, when they have to move really quickly, it is very hard to step back and say how can we bring in various sectors of the economy and have them have a discussion. But it would have been interesting to see a reach out to the broader AI community and say, okay, how can you come help us? Because what we fundamentally do in everything is we fight the current war with the weapons that worked in the last war. Um, Other than the mRNA vaccine, a lot of the things we have done to fight COVID is actually the same things we did with the Spanish flu. It's wearing masks. It is social distancing. These were literally the things we did in the Spanish flu pandemic. And what ends up happening is you get up these blunt things where we have to set rules for state or entire states or entire districts, rather than being able to use modern technology to try to figure out who is doing better contact tracing, figuring out who is truly at risk, who's truly not at risk, providing people recommendations saying, hey, you want to go out, fine, here is what you need to do to be able to go out. Like, turn this into a more of a conversation rather than an imposition of here are the top level guidance. Because what everybody is recognizing now is people are almost rebelling against constraints because they have been in lockdown for a long period of time and they're tired. Well, if it's one way communication, if there are just explicit rules, that's the way we had to do in 1918 when we didn't have smartphones in most people's pockets and we didn't really have really sophisticated ways of doing contact tracing. Um, Not enough effort is going into rethinking how can we do this with flexibility as opposed to command and control. And I think that would be a good thing for people to focus on.
Yes, definitely, Arijit, and we're looking forward for that as well. Um, with so much happening around with the vaccine rollout and a new administration coming up, um, a lot of things have been spoken about, and a lot of things people are expecting too. So, the new administration has asked some of the key players who worked on the COVID and vaccine under Trump to resign from their roles. However, now the transition of power has taken place. The Biden administration is hoping that they can quickly start to get a clear picture of where things actually stand with vaccine distribution and administration across the country. So, do you think that the Biden administration works with the private sector to leverage the benefits of AI around strategic planning? And how can that be achieved?
Well, so the part of the issue is we don't know exactly what is happening, right? Again, it's just been a week. But it would be really interesting. I have not yet seen, and I may be wrong, it may just be that I haven't seen it, but I haven't seen a broad reach out for asking people to come in and help. And again, they're heads down trying to do something. But the COVID vaccine rollout will not happen in the next 2 months. This is going to be a long, drawn out thing. As President Biden himself said, things will get much worse before they get better. Um, and we need to bring in the different voices to that conversation and get beyond simplistic rules based approaches to doing this. By the way, there are some potentially really bad ideas, which might potentially be really good ideas. For example, there are people saying just give vaccines to whoever is ready, right? Why are we worrying so much about figuring out who to get it to? If the goal is to get to 70% coverage, well, the fastest way to get to 70% coverage is give it to the people it's easiest to give it to. That might be a terrible idea. That might be a really good idea. But we don't have a visible forum for these ideas to be debated and discussed. So, what it feels like is decisions are taken with a certain group of experts at the table. For example, the decisions were mostly taken with healthcare experts at the table without having industry at the table, right? The conversation was mostly about saving lives and not about saving livelihoods. Whereas the conversation really needs to be about both. And the more we get to simplistic, it is all about this one question, the more you leave a certain part of the community, certain part of the country feeling that their concerns are not being heard. And we have seen this before, right? During the Trump presidency, the same simplistic thing worked out. On one hand, people were saying, hey, it's all about the economy, open up the economy right now, whatever happens to COVID, we'll just deal with it. And the other side was saying, hey, you can't get economic growth if you are got people dying. So working on COVID is the way to open up economy. These are actually fundamentally not contradictory questions. It's a question of degrees. It's a question of course, you have to save lives, and of course, you have to save livelihoods, and it's a balancing act. It cannot be just one end of the spectrum because shutting down everything is clearly not something the U.S. can do. And the the conversations about why we are deciding to be where we are not getting enough voices at the table beyond just the health experts. And that's something I would encourage people to do. And AI and modern technologies, not just AI, just as I said, contact tracing, which is going to be a lot about collecting data from devices. In the distribution area, it might be a lot of just getting the right IoT information in there, so we know what is happening with each vaccine. um, there's a lot of technology that can come to that can be applied over the next several months, as well as getting a lot more voices around the table.
Well, definitely, I completely agree with you. Like, we really need to get a lot more voices on the table, and as well as more suggestions and more ideas around the table, and not just the healthcare workers trying to help us guide around the situation. And yes, technology, of course, can play a very important role here, wherein even I feel that I think a lot of people have been ignoring technology, but are not able to realize the full potential of what it can provide and how it can help us solve the current situation. Now, since you have been talking a lot about the AI bias with regards to the vaccine rollout. So, since we have been talking about that, do you think like the current situation is a use case where AI could remove bias to ensure the at-risk population receive the vaccine first?
So the interesting thing about AI, okay, bias in AI comes from bias in the data, right? And data often will have bias. I'll give you a very simplistic example without naming the company. A very famous company ran an AI to figure out who they should recruit into the company. And of course, women were discriminated against because if you looked at historical data, there was discrimination against women in that company's decisions over the last decade or so, right? So AI inherently doesn't have bias, but the bias is inherent in the data it's training on. But what can be done correctly if AI can explain why it is taking a decision? And then it's on us as humans to look at that and making, and by the way, I believe that these explanations should be completely public. So if you get a decision, you are told you can get a vaccine, and I can't, you should find out why, and I should find out why. And if there's anything really stupid about the decision making criteria because there was something in the data that caused the AI to be biased, guess what? People will be screaming, people will be shouting about it. So, as long as we don't treat AI as magical, oh, the AI told us so, so it must be correct. No, an AI is just a tool. But as long as we use AI to empower the human, and empowerment happens through communicating information, giving people a voice. If we do that the right way, then AI can be absolutely important in getting this solved. If you do it the wrong way, then it's just yet another magic way of taking decisions that you have no visibility into. Because today yes, the medical experts sat down together and had a public conversation to take a decision on whether the vaccine should be allocated and what's the prioritization of the vaccines. But as I mentioned before, there was no industry voice. There was many other voices were not represented there. So AI per se won't solve it, but AI used correctly as a way to explain why the decisions are being taken and giving people a voice back, a feedback loop where they can come in and point out where the AI is going wrong. The combination of human empowerment and AI can definitely do a better job.
Completely agree with your point, Arijit. I think, uh, um, like you mentioned, like that there's bias in AI because the data is biased. So it also reflects on why it is important to have correct data so that, our algorithms can properly frame up the AI tools and the solutions that we are planning so that we have better solutions and that can help businesses as well and people all over the country as well. Um, when you're talking about artificial intelligence, so it includes the automation of cognitive and physical tasks. So it helps people perform tasks faster, better, and make better decisions as well. It enables the automation of decision making without human intervention. So artificial intelligence can enhance automation, thus reducing intensive human labor and tedious tasks. So, when you're talking about artificial intelligence and its role in decision making, and to be more specific, a data driven decision making. So, what do you think are the primary considerations around logistics that cities and states need to consider where AI could be tapped more to provide data driven decision making?
Right. So I'm going to step back on disagree with one point you made. And by the way, the point you made is the generally accepted principle. So you're not wrong. I don't believe AI is a tool for automation. I believe AI is a tool for augmentation. How can we give people superpowers as opposed to how can we remove people? So think about what the states are facing today. They have uncertain supplies, and that's getting better because they are now going to get slightly longer visibility, maybe even 3 weeks beforehand. They'll know how much drug shipment or how much vaccine shipment they'll get. But the point is, they're going to be uncertainties. There will be logistic disruptions. There'll be a truck that'll break down. There'll be a freezer that'll break. Right? There will be uncertainty. There will be uncertainty in terms of people who have signed up. Are they going to show up for their appointment? Maybe if we are lucky, all of them will show up, but somebody might actually get sick. Somebody might have some issue where they won't be able to come in. So, what is important is thinking about what is a decision a human needs to take. An example might be a nurse looks at a patient and says, do I give this vaccine to this person or not? Well, that answer is going to be different if you're at the end of the day, you have two or three vaccines ready that you can't use next day. So you kind of use it or lose it. Clearly, the decision at that moment is going to be different than at the beginning of the day when you've just diluted the vaccines, right? Human beings are not very good at switching from one set of decision making criteria to another set of decision making criteria, optimizing 17 different factors from shipment of vaccines to, you know, just giving them an incredibly complex problem. But if we start from these decision points and say, well, we want that nurse giving that vaccine to take the best informed, best, most optimal decision to take, you can have an AI consider many, many, many factors, many, many, many alternatives, and give that nurse the right recommendation. And then the nurse takes that final decision based on that recommendation. We have to start with how would we act differently based on a recommendation from an AI and start from that point of impact and then back out and create the right AI to deliver that right insight at the moment of taking a decision. It's a different way of looking at AI, but it works out very well because it's always focused on AI for the sake of delivering impact as opposed to AI for the sake of, oh, I predicted something interesting. Well, what is an interesting information worth if no decision, no action got changed based on that information? Does that make sense? So you start with the end in mind, and you would have different AIs for different things because the AI for the nurse is going to be a different AI than an AI for, say, a region where somebody is taking a decision on how to allocate, lots of vaccines. Like they would have a different kind of decision making, thus they would need a different kind of AI because their criteria and the factors they're considering are different than what the nurse would have to consider. And AI is good at that if you set it up correctly, and as long as you explain what the AI has learned and why the AI is taking the recommendation it is. If it's not a black box, it can be very helpful in that situation.
Definitely, Arijit, I very well agree with the point that start with the end in mind, and of course, AI is going to play an important role in that. Also, thank you for disagreeing with my point that where I spoke about that AI is more about automation, where you said that no, AI is more about augmentation. Thank you for telling me that because it helped me gain a new perspective towards AI. So, a lot of we have done a lot of talking about the vaccine rollout and AI. So one, let's go back to your company and uh, technology has infiltrated every aspect of our lives, changing how we work, how we learn, and how we even shop. So it's inevitable that our devices begin to reflect our civic aspirations, our desires to connect with others and to contribute to the world around us. So technology, not only about technology itself nowadays, it is more about efficiency and discovering new methods and processes. And we have to add the component of art, which is about to make wise decisions for the future of technology. So, what makes Able, your company, innovative? And are there any key partnerships or involvements done to drive the innovation?
So, what makes us innovative is we didn't start with the premise that the market is right. So when we started the company, I still remember we went to this conference, the Gartner conference. It's one of the big conferences that happens in analytics and AI. And we had a booth where we were talking about impact, not accuracy. And every other booth in the AI area was all about accuracy. We are, 2% more accurate than Google TensorFlow, and it was just accuracy, accuracy, accuracy. And in fact, somebody came and told me, hey, we were at this other booth, and they told us the only reason Able doesn't talk about accuracy is because their models are not accurate. When you see an industry obsessed over any one thing, know that that is probably flawed because you have over-indexed on that problem. You'd see all these people obsessing over Kaggle contest winners, and Kaggle contests by definition are toy problems. They're not real world problems. They're not thinking about real world constraints like how many salespeople are there, right? So what was most innovative about us was that we were able to reject what the entire market saw as being true. And over a span of 2 years, most of our competitors have moved around to our view. Gartner at that time ended up giving us a Cool Vendor Award and then give us a bunch of other awards since then. But they talked about how it was really important to focus on business impact. Forrester at the time came around and said most AutoML vendors were not realizing that accurate models rarely deliver impact. I'm kind of slightly misquoting them, but I'm approximately right, and the correct quotes are on our website. So, being able to move a market from an obsession over accuracy in a span of 2 years to actually think about business impact and optimization and ROI, they're still paying lip service to it. If you actually scratch under the surface, you'll find they're still doing what they were doing before. They're just trying to throw out an ROI number. But hey, at least you first get them to admit that they were doing that there was a problem. The first step of fixing a problem is to admit that you have a problem. And at least we have gotten the industry to realize that this obsession over accuracy instead of business impact is a fundamental problem. Another fundamental problem is this idea of creating a predictive model. So, what you do is you put in all this effort to create this perfect AI, and then the world changes. And COVID 19 was an extreme example of that, but worlds change all the time. When you put all of your effort into building a perfect model, that model will be out of date the day after you deploy the model. In fact, the better the model, the more it causes your customers' behavior, your salespeople's behavior, your marketers' behavior, your nurses' behavior, the more it causes the behavior of people to change, the more quickly it'll go out of date. So I think our innovation came from fundamentally questioning what the industry had accepted as true, not just for the last 10 years, but for the last 50 years, fundamentally. This is why we have had AI winters over and over again, because in the labs, in the conversations around universities, AI has always looked very, very exciting. The place where it has failed over and over again, and it will do it again if we don't stop overhyping AI, is in practical reality when real people have to use it. Um, this second part to this, you asked how we are how we are innovative. So hopefully I answered that. But one of the things you said, which is really important as a society, the other thing we have to be really careful about is we are getting into this world where we are defining people by their data exhaust, right? Essentially, Facebook will decide what articles to show me based on what it perceives I'd be interested in, or Google will decide what things to show me based on what it perceives my interests are. As I mentioned, when I went to college, I came here to study artificial intelligence. I got really interested in humanities. I got really interested in economics. I ended up studying 18th century court dances and Afro-Brazilian and Peruvian dances. My data exhaust, if it had existed in those days, would have caused any AI system to decide this guy just wants to know about engineering. Because that's what I grew up with in India. You decide what you're going to specialize on pretty early in your life. So defining us by your data exhaust somehow dehumanizes us. It takes away our human agency. One of the fundamental things I really believe is that the end user is key to the adoption of an AI. The end user always has to have a say, always has to be able to adjust the AI to their unique needs. And that's a philosophical difference, maybe, but I actually think that's a very practical difference too, because unless AI is adopted, it doesn't matter that you came up with a great technology. And as I said earlier, my concern right now is that too much decisioning is getting taken at the center and communicated as mandates to the edge, as opposed to giving everyone an understanding and a voice in what affects our lives. That's what I'm focused on. And that's what the Able, the company, is focused on. In fact, our tagline is I am able. And we deliberately chose that company name and that tagline because we wanted to focus on the I even more than the AI.
I think I'm really impressed with the company itself and with the vision that you guys are following. And yes, overhyping AI has been a norm, I guess, in the last couple of years, and people tend to forget the real value of AI, why AI is here, and how efficiently and correctly, ethically we should utilize it to create an remarkable impact on our business and also on our individual lives. Um, well, one last question, Arijit, for you, and that would be what would be your advice for young entrepreneurs or leaders?
So, for entrepreneurs, it's a very easy advice. I always give this as my number one advice to any entrepreneur is don't be an entrepreneur. The only reason you should be an entrepreneur is if you can't imagine not doing that mission that you want to be on, right? You should never be an entrepreneur because you want to make money. You should never be an entrepreneur because you think it's going to be a good exciting adventure, right? uh, Entrepreneurship is the hardest thing perhaps I've seen people do. Unless you're a sociopath, entrepreneurship is really hard because you feel the weight of the responsibility for every team member that has joined your team. You feel the weight of every single investor that you have taken a dollar of money from. Um, it's a very, very heavy weight. And I've gone through it multiple times. Last time I did a company, I was like, I am never starting another company again. And then I met my mission again. I looked at what I saw as the fundamental flaw in AI, and I looked at my daughter, and she was 2 years old at the time, and I was like, can I live with myself if I don't go build this company and actually try to solve a fundamental problem in AI that I really think will make her life worse? Because she will be dehumanized. She will end up having a worse life than if I go out there and fix this fundamental problem with AI. Because AI is going to be pervasive. Either it'll be the wrong kind of AI that treats data as God and tells us what to do based on our data exhaust, or it'll be the kind of AI I believe in, which is empowering and augmenting the human. And I had to do it. And note the word had. So unless you feel like you have to do it, please don't be an entrepreneur. It's incredibly hard thing to do. And for leaders, the key thing I would tell you is it is all about forming the right team. Like I do not understand people who say they're self-made. A lot of people have called me self-made because I came to the US with about $100 in my pocket. I think it was 140 or something like that, and did all this. But the number of people who helped me in my career, the number of people who helped me throughout, it's extraordinary. And leaders need to understand they might be the smartest person in the room, but they'll still be able to achieve so much more when they have an entire team who believe in the vision, who believe in what the company is trying to achieve so that they'll do the right thing when the leader is not in the room. In fact, the biggest test of a leader is what happens when they're not in the room. Have you built the right kind of culture? Have you built the right kind of team? Does your team truly understand the ethos of the company, truly understand the mission, so that you do not need to be in the room for them to be taking the right decisions? And I think those are the key one advice if I had to give advice for entrepreneurs and advice for leaders.
Great, thank you so much, Arijit. And I completely agree with your point that no one is self-made. It's about the team, the mentors, or the people that help you in even at the smallest task to climb up the ladder and achieve what you are today. Definitely. Coming to an end. Common sense and experience are no longer enough to anticipate the risks and consequences of critical business choices. AI, with its varied applications, helps businesses make informed and effective decisions which will have a positive impact on the business. And implementing AI in your business isn't as tall an order as you may imagine. It may be incorporated with your existing business application to enhance them and make them more valuable. Thank you so much, Arijit. It was such an interesting conversation with you today, and I'm sure our users are going to love it. And hoping to have you soon again with one more podcast or something more that we could do exciting with you because it was a really interesting one. It was a pleasure having you with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Priya. And I loved your summary. I just had one quick thought on your summary.
Mhm.
People should start expecting people to deliver business impact in a month. As you were saying, AI is
Mhm.
not that hard anymore. Set
Right.
a goal like that. Like everybody's going to pitch, and everybody's pitch sounds exciting. Nobody comes in and says, my AI is not good, right? But you
Mhm.
just come up with a very black and white test. Tell them, well, I'll give you a month and I will not pay you unless you deliver impact in a month. You still want to work with me? And most of them will run away screaming, and the few that will remain will either be really, really good and they know what they're doing, or they'll be desperate. And you'll be able to figure out very quickly, are they good or are they desperate? Right? But set up a
Right.
simple rule of thumb like that. Will you guarantee business impact in a month? If you will, let's have the conversation. If not, there's 500 other AI vendors right behind you.
Definitely. Listeners, I'm sure that you have heard it right and make sure you implement that. And I'm sure even I would help and spread the word across that whatever you have said is something really valuable. And I'm sure that it helps the businesses around as well.